Welcome to another episode of BHP Book Club. I am your host, Kelly Morgan. Today I'm speaking with a very young, promising author by the name of Me'Chele Sevanesian. She's 19 years old and she's written a wonderful book titled The Color Orange. The special thing about this book is that every character in her book has a disability, and she is a big advocate for those with disability, and it seems like that has been her true calling. I'm so glad that she's decided to come on the podcast, be our newest book club member, share her story, and share her journey. Welcome to the podcast, author Me'Chele Sevanesian. Me'Chele, thank you so much for being the newest member to the ever-growing book club and coming on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. I am so interested to hear about your journey because you're only 19, right? And you've already a published author. Some people are much, much older than you and wish they could be published authors. So kudos to you.
Thank
I'm
you.
interested to find out, obviously, at a young age, you knew you wanted to be a writer, right?
Yes.
So what was that like for you?
So I am currently in my third year at Cal State Northridge, and I'm getting 2 degrees, one in creative writing and one in honors English literature, and then a third minor degree in communicative disorders and deaf studies. So I have always been attracted to literature, to writing, to linguistics. I love it. And I've been historically a poet. So when I decided that I wanted to do publishing, those of us who have wanted to explore publishing realize that you're either an independent publisher and really have to put in the work on your own, or you go the very expensive route of doing traditional publishing, which can take you upwards of $15,000 for publishing houses like Scribner or Simon & Schuster. So I came across a hybrid publishing house called New Degree Press that's based out of Georgetown University. And essentially, I paid a small fee up front, and I got an entire team of editors that helped me along the way. And then in order to ensure that there was interest in the novel, around April of 2021, I was required to do a self-funding, and I was able to raise $5,000 to cover the rest of the costs for my publishing. And after the publication of my book in August of 2021, I'm now registered as an independent publisher, so I get 100% of my profits, but along the way I had an entire team of editors like I would in traditional editing.
Right, somebody to kind of help you figure out those parts, because most people, I have known authors who have written books and then just go straight to print and even do self-editing.
Yeah.
Right, which isn't probably the best idea. You need another set of eyes on your work.
And you know what else it is too? It was that sometimes your editors merely just become that back echo, because they're not necessarily going to tell you that your idea is incorrect or that your idea isn't something that, the best piece of advice that I got was from Professor Corster, who runs the program. And it was ensure that you're going to write a book that you're going to finish. And if you are a writer, you have a million ideas and they're great ideas, but they're not all novels. So when I began writing, I was writing a poetry anthology that was from the perspective of a male character who had mental health issues. And what I realized was that my poetry is very intimate. It's how I express my feelings. So I wasn't going to meet a 25,000 word deadline in a certain amount of time. And when I came up with the concept for my novel, I was like, this is the book that I'm going to finish. But my first editor wasn't telling me, are you sure you're going to be able to finish this poetry anthology? He was just editing what I told him, but his presence really allowed me to play with the fact that, am I even going to be able to give him enough stuff to edit?
Right.
What is that editing? Am I going to be able to utilize my editor the most that I can? with a poetry anthology as opposed to a novel. And now I can't get myself back to writing poetry. Now I'm stuck in narrative writing and can't get myself out of it because I just want to explain things as much as I can and create symbolism and imagery. So it's been very eye-opening.
So let's talk about the book, The Color Orange. I'm so interested in this topic and the story that you've created. So tell us about it.
So The Color Orange is essentially what, based on my research, was missing in the disability narrative. And that was a story that followed the human being with the backdrop of a neurodiversity or a disability. Because oftentimes, you know, you have the story with the overly medical point of view, you have the overly patronizing or overly emotional or trying to change the curve. There isn't just one that is. And the reason why I wanted to write that story was because I felt that it was just as important for kids in the disability community as it was for young African-American kids to see Soul or see, Chadwick Boseman as a superhero. There are very rarely any disabled characters specifically for a young audience. There is not one Disney character, for example, that has a disability, but 40% of Disney's, audience are disabled or neurotypical or neurodiverse children. There's nothing to cater to them. So that was kind of the inspiration for it. And color therapy, which is a fairly new and not, because, when you meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So color therapy isn't necessarily going to work with every child on the spectrum. But I thought that because color is such a vice for emotion, when describing the struggles that children on the spectrum go through with oversensory issues or trying to understand social cues that are not verbal, color was the best way for me to do it. So essentially, the way that Robbie views life is everybody is the color that they identify with. So he identifies with orange because orange is overstimulated. And that is how he feels. His best friend Izzy, however, who also has ASD, is pink because her special interest is fashion. They have a best friend named Roger who has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, who is colored blue because Rams blue, and Roger wants to be the first disabled sports announcer, and he knows everything about football, and he has his own football podcast. And they have a friend with Down syndrome who's yellow because she's simply the most happy and content person. And eventually they meet Willow, who's a former foster care child who's blind. And Robbie notices that there's a level of confidence that Willow exhibits that he doesn't. And he notices this level of confidence in all of his friends at the center. And he's like, why are all of you why can't I be content with myself? Is something wrong? And so essentially the book is Robbie trying to figure out what that momentary feeling of content is and what color is it? Is there a color for content? Because every feeling has to have a color. And that organization not only speaks to certain characteristics of children on the spectrum, but something that I think neurotypicals fail to do a lot is see things beyond black and white or shades of gray, is that multiple things can be different colors because everybody's different.
Very good. So how long did it take you to write this book?
So I don't even know how I did this. I began the program in October of 2020, and 25,000. So my pre-rough draft manuscript was due in January. I did not start writing this book until the beginning of December. And in a matter of 4 weeks, I was able to compose over 30,000 words. And I was also able to find, I think, about 10 people to contribute to the anecdote section at the back of the book, which is the nonfiction section of my book.
So you put this book together, you did it in like 4 weeks. It's published now. How are you finding your audience?
I don't want to say that it's difficult, but I think it's hard to find my footing. Primarily because something that I largely wanted to move away from was the type of ally or advocate that tries to overshadow the people that are actually a part of the community. And I think that oftentimes it doesn't matter how good your intentions are. If you are trying to make the most amount of money, or you're trying to get out there and you're overshadowing the work that's already being done, for a lot of people that don't necessarily accept people with disabilities or accept neurodiverse people, they're going to look for an able-bodied, neurotypical person to represent that community, because it fits into that confirmation bias that they don't have to listen to people in that community because there is someone like them acting as a representative. And that is in no way what I want to do. So I think it's just finding, because people have, especially within the disability community, they've been so receptive and they've been so thankful and they've been so kind. I haven't received any backlash or pushback, but I think, it takes, especially with books, because we're in an age of digitalness, it's very difficult to be an author, but also within a very body positive movement, trying to find my voice as this is the stance that I'm trying to take has been somewhat difficult. And the way that I've tried to explain it to people is when I talk about what it's like, for example, to be a female at the gym, I am one of many women that talk about the experiences of sometimes being uncomfortable. When I've heard my guy friends talk about what they've noticed men do, to me, that's an insight that I haven't thought about before because I'm not a man. And sometimes their insights, because they know how men think, are the most valuable. So the way that I would want to place myself is I 100% know what type of patronizing or underhanded commentary or traditional views of disabilities that neurotypical or able-bodied people often try to put the community into. And I would like to be the person to say, no, you can't do that because I know what you're doing. Because regardless, a disabled or neurotypical person is often looking at their life through the lens of their diagnosis, because that's oftentimes what will cause not a limitation, but a new perspective. And because I don't have that exact perspective, because I'm not looking through the lens of a diagnosis, I think I would rather be an ally from, like, before you can even do anything to be offensive or to get your ignorance across. I want to be the first person to be like, no, you know what? I see what you're doing.
Wow. Well, as a parent of a child who has autism, I thank you. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
Because you have to be an advocate for them. Because, society wants to put them in a box and put a label on it. And everybody's different. And autism doesn't mean dumb. It doesn't mean, slow. It means different. To me, it's just different. And sometimes different is good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the book. So the book is out there. Are you going to make an audiobook?
So I would like to. I think if I had the money, my absolute dream would be to make Braille copies of the book. That is because I have a blind character. That would be a dream of mine. I think I could do an audiobook anytime I wanted. I know that my publishing company offers it. Right now, I'm in the works with a school district to see if they want to teach the book in the curriculum. I think my main focus right now is to get the book to the correct audience and allow it to build organically, and then begin to offer, because I do talk about sign language. Almost all of the characters speak sign with each other. I use the book as well to talk about, disability discrimination in my culture, in Armenian culture, and in cultures like mine. I really tried to talk as much and as concise as I could. So I think I would love to do an audiobook. I want to do a Braille. I want to do everything that I can as a disability advocate with this book but I want to see at like how it's progressing. Like the book has been out since August, and this is one of my first podcasts. You know what I mean?
I do. I understand.
So it's taking some time, but I'm very hopeful. So I'm not necessarily saying like I wish, I'm saying eventually, because the way that it has progressed, I'm very confident that I'll get to that point.
And you will, and it will happen, and it can't happen all at once.
Yes.
It really has to progress. And if there's one thing I've learned about the whole publishing your book and being an indie author is it takes time, and that's okay. Right? So you'll get to where, especially if you believe, if you have the faith, you'll get to where you want to be. So you had mentioned putting the book in Braille, and nobody has ever said that to me on this podcast. So you got me to thinking, is that expensive?
I have not looked into it, but to my knowledge, it is a bit expensive because it's a very obviously specific type of printer. I would have to hire a company that would have to manually turn every single letter into the corresponding Braille alphabet. And I mean, I genuinely just feel like the limitations for the blind community in literature is because it's expensive. I mean, the woman that did the art for the front and back cover is disabled herself, and she's included in the book, her anecdotes at the back of the book, and her name is Miranda, and she has Ullrich muscular dystrophy. It's 1 in, I think, every 13 million. So she had, on top of those 2 images, had drawn 3 other images that I was trying to include inside the book. And my publishing company said, we can't do it. It's 4 times more expensive to publish the books with those images in color inside. So I had to turn them into stickers. So if it's 4 times more expensive just for 3 pages to be in color, I can't imagine the process that some of these printing companies would charge for Braille. And another thing is Braille isn't always an option, because I think a lot of these major companies are saying, well, how many blind people are actually reading? When in reality, a lot of blind people genuinely love to read. The need for Braille books is extremely high according to the research, but it's like what's that phrase? Oh my God, supply and demand. The demand is there, but the supply isn't because of the cost.
Right.
And so I think that's what, when I had looked into it, when I had that idea, I was like, okay, it's like, this is a possibility, but I would need like a contract with Disney in order to print enough Braille books for the blind community.
So maybe that's your calling.
Yeah.
Is to figure out how to print more Braille books. Because again, nobody's ever said this to me. So I'm really thinking like, yeah, you're 100% right. We really don't think about it. And because we all live in a digital age now where everything is viewed, you really don't think about it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even think my high school, my elementary school, I'm sure my college might have a few. I don't think they even offered Braille books to the children who were blind. I don't ever think I had a peer that was blind, but it still wasn't an option.
Right. Wasn't an option.
I talk about a lot of that in the book as well. Specifically, something I wanted to touch on was the taboo of sex education in the disability community, because I specifically remember the kids with disabilities or neurodiversities being segregated during the puberty talk, where everyone got a sheet to sign, but the kids with disabilities, their parents weren't given the opportunity to say, yes, I want my student to learn about this, or no. It was just assumed. And I think a lot of that is very much the schools not realizing how much they adhere to the concepts of eugenics, that is a type of systemic oppression of people with disabilities where you're not giving them the option to decide whether or not, or their families to decide whether or not they will ever be sexually active.
Right.
I volunteered at a ballet studio that was inclusive of all children, both with neurodiversities and disabilities. And I had a student who had gotten pregnant. Both her and her husband had a neurodiversity, and she was an amazing mother, and her son was typical. But she never was given the opportunity. She was also segregated from that conversation and ended up having a baby fairly young. That education is a necessity. And by suggesting that, not only are you saying, oh, these people, these people don't engage in that, you're also saying they can't comprehend it.
Yeah, they won't understand.
Yes.
Right? And we don't have the time to explain it to them.
Right, their aide can explain it to them. Well, it's like, no, their aide is trying to teach the rest of your class also not to make fun of them. Because right. I can't even say how many times I have friends who are aides that have had to be like, excuse me, we don't say that to our neurotypical friends. Why are we saying it to this friend? I thought that it would get somewhat better through social media in the sense where now we have a lot of these social justice warriors. But it has taken like this weird shift where you can't take a joke, bro. And specifically, this is the most weirdest example, but there are two UFC fighters, and they're both one is from Saudi Arabia and one is from a small, predominantly Russian Muslim village, I think in Yugoslavia or former Yugoslavia, but their names are Hasbullah and Abdul, and they both have an HGC tumor on their brains that causes them to be, I think they're both about 3 foot, they have small voices, and they went viral for fighting each other, and everyone thought that they were kids. And now you have fan accounts and meme accounts, but none of these people are taking these men seriously. They're 18 years old, and everyone's just laughing at them, and they're like, oh, these people are taking me seriously, I'm getting famous, they're going to consider me to be a fighter, and they think everyone's laughing with them. And to me, it's so beyond irritating, because you're not throwing them a bone. They don't need you to. That's again another type of patronizing ableism. Just because they're disabled and you don't think that they're held to, or they could fight against a pro UFC fighter, does not mean you consistently laugh at them.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I do. I really like your message. I really, really do. I really like the way that you're trying to get the book out there and the way that you want it to be organic. I like the idea with the Braille. I never thought about that before. So now you've got me thinking, God, I wonder if that's expensive or how that works. And you're right. I don't think most of us ever think about it. Society gets so wrapped up with stuff that is unnecessary that we tend to lose sight of the things that are really important. And unfortunately, the disabled community is almost invisible sometimes. Yeah, I can't, when I even think about when the ADA laws were passed, and this was something that I had been challenged about recently, once Texas had passed their abortion ban, was, are there going to now be more state-funded disability, programs? Because I know that in California, IEPs are, I think it's 1 in every, 6 children have an IEP, and it's not even for neurodiversities, it could be for behavioral issues or mental health issues, or in different states, they have that opportunity. But I was worried because I remember learning about how disabled people were forced out of their wheelchairs, and some even took themselves out of their wheelchairs and climbed up the steps of the Capitol building and sat on the steps and were forced, literally with zip ties in their hands, and their wheelchairs were disposed of. And that's insurance beyond, and it takes months to create. And the ADA laws were put on hold because it was somehow a debatable topic to give disabled Americans access to their own college buildings. And only, for example, 30% of USC is accessible. There's 30% of USC that is not accessible to students with disabilities. So if you happen to have a class there, it's like, tough luck. You can't fit a wheelchair in your laboratory class at a school like mine. You can't fit an entire wheelchair to be able to turn comfortably. You can't do it at a mall. So yes, there are disability accessible ramps, but nothing else seems to be disability accessible. I even remember when I was working at the mall, they used to put clothes
over the disability accessible sign that had Braille on it. And every single time I came into work, I took it down and I would get in trouble and I would say, I hope you guys get written up. Because if somebody who is blind is looking for the disability accessible room, the only thing that has Braille is covered by an outfit. You can't afford to just let that one not have anything on it. You have to have that there. And this was at the time that I was writing the book. So I was doing extensive research on IEPs, on ADA laws, on the history of disability. I was doing extensive outlines of what I wanted my characters to be. And even when I proposed the fact that I would have a character in a wheelchair who loved football, people would laugh at me. They'd be like, no one's gonna believe it. And I was like, no, you're gonna listen to the way that he talks about himself. And he argues that being disabled and being able to really focus on the dynamics of football just because he can't run does not mean he's not able to see the mistakes that they're making.
Yeah.
You don't need to run to know that somebody running backwards isn't running the right way around the track. It does not take that much to understand human behavior. We're not that complex.
You are so right. Wow. So you've got a lot going on. Are you working on anything else?
I wish. I really wanted to start a second book, but I am beginning my third degree starting in January. So I will be taking a total of 10 classes, 5 at one university and 5 at another, so that I can get my master's on time. Because I was gonna go to law school, and then right after the book came out, I was like, you know what? This is my place. These are my people. This is where I feel the best. So I decided to do speech therapy. But English literature and creative writing don't transfer. So I have to take a minor course, like a minor program for it. But I mean, it'll just be 2 semesters of crying. And I will finally be able to, I'm going to be focusing on my book. I'm going to be an advocate. I'm going to be starting to work at a speech therapy office. So everything seems to be working out in the way that it should. So I'm very happy.
Well, congratulations. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story and just all the information you shared and really bringing disability awareness to people, because I really don't think people are aware. I'm aware because I have a child who is disabled. So, but to me, it's not a disability. It's just how it is. I don't view it as a disability. I never have. But I thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And we need more of you out there in the world. Michele, thank you so much. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of BHP Book Club. I am your host, Kelly Morgan. I just wrapped up with 19-year-old author Me'Chele Sevanesian, and we talked about her book, The Color Orange. She is a huge advocate for those with disabilities. She's on her way to becoming a speech therapist. She's motivated, she's driven, she's an advocate. I truly enjoyed having her on the podcast. The book, The Color Orange, is available wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Go and get your copy. It's a wonderful book. She even talked about putting this book in Braille, which, as many podcast episodes as I have done, nobody has ever mentioned putting their book in Braille to me. So kudos to you, Michele. If you are interested in being on the podcast and promoting your book, it's really simple. Go to my website, brightheadedpublishing.com. Go to the contact section, drop me a line, we'll hook up. Next thing you know, you're on the podcast promoting your book, sharing your story and your journey with all of us. And like always, I can't wait to meet you. I'm excited when any author decides to come on and share their journey. And the goal is that we can connect that author with a reader. That is the goal of the podcast. So next week, I will bring you another author and their journey and their book and their story. But until then, keep writing.